You saw it for 3.5 hours in Columbia on Saturday night, but maybe you still don't believe it. Wow. South Carolina put up 63 on Tennessee, knocked those Vols down the college football playoff rankings. We got Chris Phillips on the line from the Spurs Up Show, spursup.com. You see it right there, the spursupshow.com. Chris, how are we doing tonight?
Mark, I'm doing fantastic. Like you mentioned, man, it's a little bit hard to believe that we're sitting here having this conversation. I'm still almost a bit in shock, if you will. I think if I wasn't there in person watching it and rushing the field myself, I don't know if I actually would have believed that it happened. But luckily, we woke up on Sunday, and I realized it wasn't a dream, and it really did take place, and the Gamecocks have derailed the Tennessee Volunteers' playoff hopes. But doing well, man. Happy early Thanksgiving to you and yours. Appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to talking some ball as always.
This is why everybody that goes out there and uses the transitive property, we can just throw that away for anything. And I'm a big resume guy. There's the 10-game resume. That's the 11-game resume, that sort of thing. But when there's no way you can figure out how that's possible when you see South Carolina score 6 points against Florida, and then you see Florida go lose to Vandy. There's just no way you can add this up and it can make any sense. So I'm going to ask you the impossible, Chris, and I'm going to ask you to explain how South Carolina did that.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned 6 points against Florida, Mark. Those weren't even offensive points. That was special teams. So you got shut out on the offensive side. You go from getting shut out against Florida on offense, the 13th ranked defense in the SEC, to putting up 63 points against Tennessee. I mean, you think about it, Mark. You scored 9 touchdowns. You came into that game against Tennessee with 18 total touchdowns in SEC play. Spencer Rattler threw 6 touchdowns. That was more than he had the entire month of October, and that included games against SC State and Charlotte. So, I mean, you just think about what had to happen. And you asked the question, right, Mark? Like, try to explain the impossible, if you will, because I gave this team no chance also, and it was a lot to do because the offensive side, and I thought this team was just dead offensively. You've heard Shane Beamer talk about it, and Mark, around these parts, the number one question this week has been, well, who was calling the plays, right? Who was really the mastermind behind it? And Shane Beamer has said adamantly, it was Marcus Satterfield. It was Marcus Satterfield. And I'm not saying that I'm calling Beamer a liar by any means, but as you and I both know, Mark, I mean, it's coach speak in these pressers, right? They're not going to be forthcoming about everything. I guess it took getting embarrassed in Gainesville for somebody to finally say, okay, we are changing something. And Shane Beamer even admitted in his Tuesday presser that was the simplest offensive game plan, Mark, they had all season. And that's what it looked like on the field. I mean, it was a football team that was playing free, playing loose. There wasn't a whole lot of this check with me before the snap. They had been doing very slow and monotonous. It was very much just, hey, get the play, let's go. Spencer Rattler, get the ball, go through your reads, get it out quick. I thought you saw him obviously play free. And I mean, I'll tell you this, Mark, when you talk about great games by quarterbacks at the University of South Carolina, that game Spencer Rattler put together on Saturday, that might be the greatest game of all time by a quarterback in Garnet Black. I mean, really, truly, 30 of 37, 438, 6 touchdowns on the night. I mean, he was masterful, right? And he showed why he was so clamored after, or why he was so sought after, I should say. He showed he still got it, right? He's still that guy. So, I mean, he was on all night. When you have a quarterback play like Rattler, the coaches talk about, well, the plays are there, it's on execution. You saw the execution in effect on Saturday night. And then you finally saw some of the Gamecocks playmakers shine because of it. I said, I keep saying, Mark, that I was shocked, I was stunned, but I'm not surprised that South Carolina, like, to see these playmakers making plays. We felt like all season these guys were there. I don't think anybody was expecting Carolina to score 63 a game, but that's, Mark, what was so frustrating is guys like Antoine Wells, Dak Joyner, Josh Vann, Jalen Brooks, Amarian Brown, Jaheim Bell. I mean, they're all playmakers. They didn't forget how to play football. It looked like an offense that finally they simplified. They played to their strengths. I think they took advantage of a Tennessee defense that's not great by any means, but better than Florida, at least statistically. So, I mean, it just all clicked. And, I mean, them scoring 9 touchdowns, you could have given me a million guesses at what would have happened on Saturday night, and I just would have never seen that coming. So, I mean, to go from what, again, like you mentioned, to go from what you did in Gainesville to that, it's stunning. It's stunning, to say the least.
There are South Carolina fans that, regardless of whether Shane Beamer ever accomplishes anything, are still going to look back on that night as a magical night in and of itself. That felt amazing. That was incredible. But the big question is, what do you parlay that into? You got to parlay that into consistent wins against quality teams, and then program building, and we will know 2 or 3 years from now whether that was truly just, hey, that was fun. Or that was a breakthrough. And now you're staring at Clemson. So on one hand, you can look at it as, wow, this must have gotten Clemson's attention. Or is it going to be difficult to reach that high again? Not that you got to score 63 points again, but to put it all together against a legitimate top 10 team in the country.
Mark, I think you phrase it beautifully too in regards to you can look at it one of two ways, right? Like, it's great to have momentum, but from the Gamecock side of things, so many Gamecock fans, Mark, if you talk to them or if you kind of read around and listen to what they're saying, it's like, well, here comes the typical Gamecock letdown game. And what's interesting about that is that, that's sort of a narrative that floats around. And I feel like a lot of fan bases probably say that about their own team as well. It's like, God, we can just never, because very few teams, Mark, let's call it for what it is. Very few teams play at that high of a level on a week in, week out basis outside of the elites, right? It's hard to sustain that level of play. There's so much parity in college football. But, Mark, I thought a stat that's really interesting from the gambling side of things, South Carolina following an against the spread win, which obviously they did against Tennessee, right? Following an against the spread win, the Gamecocks are 1-9-1 in their last 11 against the spread. So maybe it's not just a narrative. South Carolina has not done a good job of, 1 week they overachieve and by the numbers, by the stats, the next week they underachieve. So, they'll be fighting that trend also. 7-0 at night, 0-4 in the day. This kickoff is at noon. Clemson's won 40 in a row at home. They've won 7 in a row in the rivalry. So, there's some negative trends, but as last weekend showed us, right? Throw all that out the window. And especially in a rivalry game, all those numbers really don't mean jack, right? So, putting together back-to-back impressive performances, or at least, and I love what Steven Garcia said on our show on Monday, Mark, is that, offensively, right, nobody's expecting to go 63. Clemson's got a great defense. Their front seven, arguably the best in college football. Shane Beamer praised as the best. I think Kirby Smart might have something to say about that, but one of the best in the country. And, it's a much better defense you saw against Tennessee, but you've set the standard now offensively. Right? Like, I just don't think you have the built-in personnel excuse. You've got talent. You've got playmakers, and it's all about how you utilize them. Now, again, that's not saying you should go out there and score 60 against Clemson. You go out there and you lose 27-24 or 31-28, and you put up a good offensive fight or whatever, you can tip your cap to an opponent, right? But there's no more room for any of these inexcusable performances like we saw against Florida. So, that's the big question, Mark. Can South Carolina put together back-to-back performances? That's the question that I have. Which Gamecock team is going to show up? Clemson, very good football team. I think they're flawed. I think they're mortal, if you will. I don't think they're one of the best 4 teams in college football. If they get in the playoff, I think they're going to get boat raced. But, give them credit. They've taken care of their business outside of the Notre Dame game. But this game, to me, Mark, not taking anything away from Clemson, because, again, they've got talent all over the place, but this game's about South Carolina. It's just which team shows up. That is the question. That's what as I sit here on this Wednesday, Mark, I admittedly, I don't make my predictions till Friday, but I admittedly normally have a pretty good feel on what I'm going to pick, even like Monday, Tuesday, if you will. I keep going back and forth because I just don't know who's going to show up, right? And I don't know that it's necessarily going to be, you're not going to get a 63-point performance like you had against Tennessee. I also don't think you're going to get shut out like you did against Florida. It's somewhere in the middle, but the question is, what is it closer to? I think that's the big question. So
it's funny that you phrased it like that, because we had our Clemson guy on a couple of days ago, and the very first thing I said to him was, I pretty much know what Clemson team's going to show up on Saturday, because that team's been showing up every week. One of the best defenses in the country and a very challenged offense. And they've beaten everybody decent in the ACC by a decent margin, but they're not blowing people out because they're just not that good. But they're the better team, and that's what's showing up week to week for Clemson. I said, when it comes to South Carolina, I don't know who's going to show up.
Yeah, it's again, is it Jekyll or is it Hyde, right? It's just, But again, you've set the standard offensively. You know you have playmakers. And again, it's a different challenge with the Clemson defense. Also, though, focusing on the other side, Will Shipley killed you last year. And Maffa's a great running back too. But I think if South Carolina's defense can turn this into a game where, and it's much easier said than done, obviously, but you can limit the running game, right? You're not going to completely take it away. If you can limit Shipley, limit Maffa, get them in some third and longs, and put the game on the shoulder of DJU, right? He's been solid in spots, but he's also had some spots where he's been really bad, right? He just has not been great. So, I think that's their best bet defensively is make him go beat you. I think the Gamecocks, from what I'm hearing behind closed doors, it sounds like they do trust their secondary. They're going to let their guys go man on man, mano a mano, and I think it's a smart move, right? Your secondary, one of the best in the SEC, I'd say. You look at the turnover numbers, and you look at guys like Cam Smith, Darius Rush, the young guys like DQ Smith, Nicky Memori that are playing really, really good football for you. They trust those guys, and I think they should. So I think you got to sell out on stopping the run on the Clemson side, on your side, on offense. I think attacking that secondary, right? Spencer Rattler needs to be on again. It's crazy. We go from this time last week, Mark, folks were clamoring for, maybe we'd do better with Luke Doty. Maybe we should bench Rattler. He's not that good. To Mark, if Spencer Rattler wins this game, if Spencer Rattler goes out and balls out and wins this game, I think he's certified as a Gamecock legend forever. I mean, I really do. I know that seems crazy, but if you're able to, they remember November, right? That's what we all say. And if you can close out the season, solidified 8-4 year, and do it in back-to-back wins against top 10 opponents, and one of those was the arch rival on the road, I think the way he'll be viewed forever, I mean, I will certainly look at him with admiration for what he did for the University of South Carolina. So, I think attacking the passing game, stopping the run, the offensive line got a big challenge as well, though, right? That Clemson defensive front, they've got to be able to give Rattler time. But it should be a fun one. But again, like you said, which Gamecocks team shows up, which offense. And I think South Carolina needs to come in and attack just like they did against Tennessee. That's what I loved seeing, that they played with nothing to lose, right? Cam Smith with the postgame quote, we let them hang, right? I mean, play the same way. I mean, because Carolina really, Mark, is playing with house money. You've already cashed the over. You've gotten to 7 wins. I mean, you obviously want to win this game, but I think South Carolina's best bet is to play that way. Go play free. Go play loose. Be on the attack. Be on the attack. Make Clemson beat you. Be the aggressor.
Chris, you used the term arch rival. And when I look at the SEC Eastern Division, you can take any other school, for me, from my perspective, and say, okay, it's Tennessee. Their rivals are X, Y, and Z. Kentucky, their rivals are X, Y, and Z. And I think that's because all those other schools have been in the league forever. In South Carolina, I know it's been a long time, 1992, but when you're my age, you remember when South Carolina was not an SEC member. Now they are. So those rivalries are newer. Now, when you're playing a Kentucky every year, when you're playing a Tennessee every year, you build up a rivalry, and it's different because you're competing within the division for a championship. But this one is just different, right? It's just serious, in-state. Your neighbor, your family, you're all that.
Yeah. In this state, Mark, you're either garnet and black or orange and purple. I mean, it is pure hatred, right? It doesn't need conference ties or affiliations or championships on the line. This is the type of rivalry, Mark, where you ask members of both fan bases, both teams could go 0-11, but if they win that one game, that one final game, right? The season is made. You had a good year. So it's pure hatred for sure. Like you mentioned, I mean, families, houses divided, and, coworkers, people have to run into, it's serious. It's a huge game. Everybody in the state, we don't have pro sports, right? There are no pro sports. There's nothing else. Carolina, Clemson is it. And, I can't wait for the rivalry to be renewed. South Carolina, though, needs to do their part in regards to, the rivalry loses some luster when one side's winning every year, right? So, but either way, I still look at it as one of the best rivalries in college football and really in college sports in general. I think it's up there with like the Egg Bowl is one of the most underrated. The Egg Bowl, I think, is a very underrated rivalry. I mean, that is pure hatred, just hatred between the two.
I covered that for 7 years.
Yeah, Carolina Clemson is very, very much the same. It is absolute pure hatred. And it's just interesting the amount of folks that, again, houses divided, marriages, siblings, family members, all that stuff. It really runs deep, right? And it's tradition, it's family, and it means a whole lot to the people of this state.
And Chris, you're going to release your pick when?
Friday. I will drop that Friday. You know, it's funny, Mark. Like if I felt convicted in a pick right now, I'd give it to you. But I really don't. I mean, I damn near may go on my show and flip a coin. I mean, I don't know. Like you know, because it's you know what the tough thing is, Mark, when you're making picks, and one of my greatest challenges is that, you know, there is that fandom side to you, but you have to remove that as much as possible and just see it for what it is and not what you want it to be, right? Because, of course, I want to believe that the best version of this South Carolina football team is going to show up and they're going to finally snap this streak. But then, you know, you weigh in the statistics, you weigh in the numbers. And, I mean, obviously, I'm preaching the choir here with you, but it hits even harder when it's the rivalry and you want this one so bad. You know, it's easy for me to say that, well, I mean, Carolina's going to lose to Tennessee. I don't hate them nearly to the level that I hate a Clemson, right? But now listen, it's a challenge. I mean, realistically, Mark, I think you look at this game, there's a reason Clemson opened as a 16-point favorite, now 14.5. The roster, obviously, I don't think anyone would argue that South Carolina's roster is on the level of Clemson's, right? The way they've recruited has been fantastic for sure. Dabo's done a great job. But, you know, I think it's one of those games, Mark, I go back to what I said over the summer that, you know, if there's something that gives me confidence, and it would have given me a lot more confidence had he been playing this way all season, but the Spencer Rattler we saw against Tennessee, maybe not to that level, but the way he played, that's the guy I expected to see all year. And if it comes down to a quarterback duel, which a lot of games in college football do, right, Mark? Mm-hmm. Sure. I feel confident in South Carolina. I do. And if Spencer Rattler plays 80% of what he did against Tennessee, in regards to him being on, the Gamecocks have got a great shot. I mean, I hate to put it all on him, but let's face it, it's a quarterback-driven game. So it was evident early that Spencer Rattler was sharp. Some of the throws he was making, just putting it right where he wanted it. If they can get that guy again, if he can stay hot, I like their chances.
This game means everything for the people in this state. You know, there's no professional team here, you know, like there are in a lot of other states. I think it's probably one of the most intense in-state rivalries in the country. It doesn't get the same kind of publicity that, say, Auburn, Alabama gets, but you know, the emotions surrounding this game probably rival the emotions that surround that game. It's just these two teams haven't been quite as nationally relevant throughout the years as some of these other teams in these other rivalries, so it doesn't get, you know, the national play that some of these other games get. But for the fans in this state, this game is what it's all about. It's bragging rights, 365 days a year. And, man, it's fun to be a part of.
Yeah, Jason Priester on the line from allclemson.com. Get on over there. This is the week to do it, to get prepped for the big South Carolina game and on into the ACC championship game against North Carolina. All right, Jason, did that South Carolina effort against Tennessee get anybody's attention?
Yeah, I think it got everybody's attention, man, and caught everybody kind of by surprise. You know, this was an offense that really couldn't move the ball at all against Florida, scored 6 points. I don't remember what all the numbers were, but I know they struggled to move the ball down, up and down the field, period. And Tennessee comes in and they just throttle them. The fifth-ranked team in the country, hanging 63 on them. Probably Spencer Rattler's best game of his collegiate career. I think it's gotten everybody's attention. I know it got the players' attention and the coaches' attention inside that Clemson football facility. They talked a little bit about it yesterday. Co-defensive coordinator Mickey Kahn talked about being caught a little bit off guard with that performance from South Carolina. But no doubt it has been talked about.
And that's the interesting thing, because we've got a Clemson team that is so rock steady, and certainly not, at least through this part of the season, not a vintage Clemson team like an all-time great team, but certainly a top 5 to 10 team in the country. They seem to pretty much give you the same effort, maybe outside that Notre Dame game. Every week it's going to be this, it's going to be this. And then the South Carolina team comes in and they're topsy-turvy all over the place. You know, they can score 10 points against Mizzou and lose that game. Then they come out against Tennessee and they go crazy. That makes for an interesting matchup just in regards to the wild card status of this Gamecock team.
Yeah, you know, it's been interesting to follow this South Carolina team this year. You know, the fans have been real intent on Marcus Satterfield not being back as offensive coordinator next year. The offense has just struggled that much. And then they come out with a game like this, and now you see all the theories being thrown out that Satterfield suddenly wasn't calling the plays Saturday, which I don't buy for a minute. But it is definitely crazy, and it's got to make it that much harder to prepare for this team if you're in Clemson's spot, because you just don't know which team's going to show up. Do you get the Spencer Rattler that we saw Saturday night, or do we get the one we saw down in Gainesville? They kind of been a Jekyll and Hyde team this year. They've looked good in spurts, and then they've looked terrible in spurts.
He is a guy that has the talent to show what he showed last week, but he just doesn't deliver consistently. That's just all there is to it. We saw that at Oklahoma, and now we see that at South Carolina. So we'll see if he's going to be hot 2 weeks in a row. And obviously, he got a ton of help on the outside, and his offensive line did the job. So is there anything that you got from the Miami game that changes your mind about Clemson at all from the outside? Not that I took in every play of the game, but from the outside, it appeared as though, well, that's what I expected. That's Clemson going out there with the lunch pail and doing its work, getting the job done, and taking care of business.
The biggest thing that I took away from the Miami game is Wes Goodwin has been talking all year about wanting to see a full 4-quarter performance from that defense. And I think Saturday he saw it for the first time. It was a very aggressive game plan, second week in a row. I think that defense has really responded since that terrible outing up in South Bend. And one of the biggest keys to the turnaround, Barrett Carter moved inside to wheel linebacker to fill in for an injured Trenton Simpson against Louisville. And he was just so good that when Simpson came back last week against Miami, they left Carter there and moved Simpson back out to Sam, where he's played the previous 2 seasons. And Simpson responds by having his best game of the year. I think he had a couple of sacks, but he's so dynamic. You can use him in so many different ways, but he is at his best when he's not having to line up inside and fight through traffic. He's out there on the edge and he's playing in open space. And we saw that on Saturday, and the defense looked different. It for the first time all season, for 4 quarters, this defense resembled the group that many, including myself, expected it to be coming into the season. And if Clemson can get that kind of effort again this Saturday, that'll go a long ways towards getting them their 8th straight win over South Carolina.
Folks, we ask that you'd like the video, and you can share these videos out on social media because you enjoy them. Other people will as well that aren't aware that we're here talking Clemson football with Jason each and every week. And subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. Get on over to allclemson.com on SI. Check out Jason's work as Clemson prepares for South Carolina and the ACC championship game after that. Seems to be some hope out there that Bo Collins is going to get back in the lineup on Saturday.
Yeah, they Dabo Swinney said today they expect Bo Collins back. He was back on the depth chart. Brian Bresee, he also missed the Miami game. He was sick last week. He'll be back. But Clemson's biggest thing on offense the past few games has just been the turnovers. They put the ball on the ground. I think it was 5 times against Miami. They only lost 3 of them, but they put it on the ground 5 times. And that's alarming. And it's not just one guy, it was spread out. And I think it's the 4th game in a row that they've lost the turnover margin. And that at some point that's going to catch up with you. As much of an advantage of playing at home and Death Valley gives Clemson, if you're turning the ball over and not forcing a lot of turnovers, you're kind of nullifying that advantage at times. That game against Miami would have easily been much worse if Clemson doesn't shoot themselves in the foot with the multiple turnovers. And they've got to get that cleaned up. If they don't, it's going to catch up with them at some point, whether it be this week, next week, or in the postseason. But at some point, they cannot keep losing the turnover battle week after week and expect to keep winning football games.
Jason, does this game historically impact recruiting? And do you expect this specific game that's going to be played on Saturday to impact any recruiting battles?
You know, it's kind of more specific to the guy. You know, it might have an effect on some of the in-state guys, but you know, they grew up rooting who they rooted for, and they tend to lean that way. Not all of them, some of them, but I do think if you're South Carolina, this game can probably help you from a recruiting standpoint more so than it does Clemson. Clemson's an established brand. You know, one loss isn't going to hurt them too bad. Clemson's 2023 class is all but locked up. I think there's one in-state guy still left on the board, and I'm not even sure he's got a South Carolina offer. He's a wide receiver out of Greenville, and his name's Tyler Brown. He announces on Thursday. I fully expect he'll commit to Clemson, but he's a former Minnesota commit actually. But you know, it just depends on who you're talking about. I mean, it's always better to win the game. Make no mistake. You know, that's always a bullet you want to have in the chamber, so to speak. You know, to use out there in your pitch on the recruiting trail. But I think if we're talking this game this year, I think South Carolina has more to benefit in that regard than Clemson does.
Are Clemson fans talking about what North Carolina is doing? They blew a 17-point lead against Georgia Tech. They've got a tough game against NC State. Of course, Clemson folks wanted them to show up at 11-1 in the ACC championship game. That's not going to happen. But is there much talk about what North Carolina is doing and how that impacts Clemson's resume?
I've seen a little bit of it. If there's a lot of talk about it, I haven't seen it. There was more talk about needing South Carolina to beat Tennessee, and I was of the opinion that North Carolina's loss might have hurt Clemson worse than Tennessee's loss, or I'm of the opinion that North Carolina's loss might have hurt Clemson worse than if Tennessee had won. But you know, I know some people are keeping one eye on what North Carolina's doing. That's a scary offense. But I thought Georgia Tech came in with a brilliant game plan. And for the first time this season, I thought Drake May kind of looked like a freshman at times. You know, they kept him bottled up inside the pocket, pressured him, didn't let him have any escape routes out of there. And it impacted him. He struggled at times. And, you know, they might have laid out a blueprint for Clemson to have some success in that game in Charlotte next weekend.
I know from a perception standpoint that facing a North Carolina team that's 11-1 looks good on the resume and looks good for a final data point to show the College Football Playoff Committee versus UNC being 10-2, or if they lose this weekend, 9-3. But if you look at it objectively, North Carolina is playing in Georgia Tech and in NC State, two teams that Clemson played. So if you're looking at it objectively, somebody's got to win the game. Somebody's got to lose the game. So while North Carolina's resume is being knocked down, the resume of Georgia Tech and NC State should be propped up further and more impressive by those wins. So it's a win and a loss either way if you're looking at it objectively.
Yeah, you know, Clemson's still going to need a little bit of help if they want to get back into the playoff discussion, regardless of what North Carolina does. Obviously, Clemson's got to take care of their own business, but they're probably going to need USC or TCU to lose, you know, to get back into this thing. So you know, these things tend to work themselves out. I think for the most part, the committee's got it right most years. The four teams that were supposed to go did go. And again, I just think more often than not, this stuff works itself out. We like to talk about all the chaos that's on the horizon. And then by the time we get to the end of the season, we don't have nearly the chaos that we were hoping to have or thinking we might have. And I know this college football season has been crazy. I just got a feeling it's going to kind of play out that way again, and things are going to fall into place. And whether that includes Clemson being in the playoff or not, we'll see. But I think those things work themselves out.
Jason Priester breaking down Clemson football for us each and every week here at the Voice of College Football. We encourage you to hang out on allclemson.com on SI. Check out Jason's work on this upcoming game against South Carolina, and then, of course, the ACC championship game. Jason, we appreciate you stopping by. Happy Thanksgiving, and hope you enjoy the game.
Yes, sir. I'll also add this in there. You know, Clemson's won 7 in a row, going for an 8th straight win. Neither team in this long storied rivalry played over 100 games, goes back to the 1800s. Neither team has ever won 8 in a row. The record is 7. So Clemson looking to set a series record in this one.
All right, Jason. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Mark.